Welcome to Thrive and Advance podcast, where we help you make business growth predictable, profitable, and enjoyable. I'm your host, Dr. Xray. Today marks the third and final conversation with Terry Norval, founder and president of Enterprise Inc., and Murray Genuinski, the founder and president of Act One International Corporation, talking about creating a sustainable growth. Good morning, Terry and Murray. Thank you so much for joining us again. We appreciate your time and talent. So far, we've given so much of the theory, what's behind the 7 stages of growth model. I really like to dig into more practical side of it, meaning the model in action. So I'd like to invite you to share with us any experiences that you think is important for our audience to hear from to better understand how this model works in action.
All right.
So having said that, Terry, I believe you're coming fresh off one of the new experiences and a follow-up experience. So I would like to invite you to start by sharing that experience with us.
Sure, I'd love to, and thank you for having us back again. Yes, I was just up in North Dakota, actually, working with a stage 5 organization, and it was a redo. So I'll give a context for the first time, which we did a couple years ago, and then why they had me back to revisit it and go through the X-Ray Diagnostic process again. And I just smile because the results, the alignment, the engagement, the enthusiasm that comes about at the completion of this, the 2-day or the 1-day process, it's so good. So let me give you some context. So I tend to work with organizations that aggregate up to a stage, and yet they have either retail locations or divisions, usually retail, whether it's to the public or what we call closed door, that are at either stage 1, stage 2, little stage 3, that get them up to those 66 employees overall. So when we did the X-ray a couple years ago, it was because there was no unification between each of those locations. And if you're going to have a solid foundation that's scalable and sustainable, each of those locations had to be brought up under same mission, same vision, same values, and that was the desire of the new CEO who had taken over from her father and how the business had been run, which was not going to be what needed to happen going forward in a very competitive industry. And so using the X-ray process, we were able to identify where they were so out of alignment and what needed to happen to get them to embrace, we're one organization. So I keep going back to that word alignment. And one of the other big challenges, because I always start by asking the CEO, what's keeping you up at night, right? What are we really here to achieve so that it makes your job easier? Because that's really what this process does. It makes the CEO, the COO, it makes the leadership team's job so much easier to have everybody, on the boat in the right seats going in the same direction. And it was that they didn't really understand the profit motive. They were so service oriented, which is a fabulous thing. And yet, profit is good to keep the lights on, to make payroll. And so that was a big mission back then, was to put the structure into place and to get the mentality aligned as to what business they were in, why they were doing it. And we were able to get the mission, vision, and the values kind of just chunked away so that they could then go about reinforcing it over the last couple years. And I say couple years because last year they tried to do this all themselves. And they took a vote whether they should have me back this year. And it was unanimous, even with those, those tougher people who pride themselves on being able to do it. They're like, no, we need to have the structure back. And the distinction this year was that they had achieved so much that value rollout was one of their top strengths, whereas they didn't even know what values were when we started a couple years ago. So, we take a look at what are the strengths, what are the challenges, and some of the same challenges existed. Employee buy-in was still on the list. Strengthening financials even more was still on the list. So what's great is that we could monitor and acknowledge, oh my gosh, all the progress that had been made and what was next up for this go round. And what we focused on, what the initiatives, the 5 initiatives, 3 of the 5 centered around people, how to really create that environment where people can thrive, and what does that look like, and how do we unify not just the top level, all the way down throughout the organization at this time. So I'll pause here, invite either of you to jump in. Have you had that type of experience as well when you've gone back to do a second X-ray, and the uniformity and what shows up different, and anything to add to what I've just shared?
The larger organizations grow, employee engagement gets harder because it's harder to make those connections. So in my experience, it gets even more difficult, but it demands more attention, not to the fluff. I engage with a lot of organizations that add a lot of fluff because they want to be the best place to work, but the substance is lacking. They give work from wherever, or perhaps no schedules, your own schedule, work, food ready in the pantry or in the break room, and so on and so forth. But the substance, where employee has a voice, employee feels connected with the vision and mission of the organization, and also the employee feeling that their contributions matter. Yes. Those are the 3 aspects that truly makes people engage with an organization. And the larger organization gets, I feel that's compromised. So that's my experience. Murray, I jumped in what you were going to say, so go ahead.
Well, all I was going to add was, when you get to a stage 5 company like you were dealing with, Terry, I have found that, the bandwidth of that stage gets a lot larger in terms of number of people. So it's not surprising that a lot of their initiatives were around people. And sometimes I hate to say this, but the bigger you get, the more places there are to hide.
Yes.
And unless that culture is there that you spoke of, with that alignment, their values and their vision and mission, then that gives them something to keep people really moving and then get the profit they're looking for.
Yeah, exactly. And it's interesting, we could go back and track, and I'm looking at the summary that I prepared for them, because we go back 2 stages, we do the 3 stages, they made such progress, at least, 15 to 20 percentage points of growth of getting stage 3 priorities done, getting stage 4 priorities done, and moving quite nicely from 42% completion in 2018 to 62% completion, 2 years later. So they're on a really great trajectory. And the reason they wanted to do this again was to keep it going. Because it's like so many organizations, you have the best of intent, and yet we get caught up in the whirlwind, and this isn't something else to do. This is how you go about doing your business. And it can fall too often to the wayside. And I would also add this, because I just did another revisit X-Ray yesterday, and across the board, we're continually prioritizing KPIs, the key performance indicators, and making sure that those aren't just something on a piece of paper, that they're actually using the goals or the targets, whatever the organization likes to call them, on an ongoing active basis. And because, you know, numbers, money is a language of business, and to be able to track and what should they be tracking. And another big conversation is oftentimes around transparency. What information is ideal to be shared so people feel in the know and they feel trusted versus, you know, the owners that don't want to share anything because, oh no, I don't want that information out. Well, that's old school. Today, people want that sense of belonging and being in the know and understanding the purpose and how their role. And so those are the conversations we also have, is how much is too much, and empowerment, and making sure that everyone on the team understands how they make an impact with the customer. And so the conversations also, the last couple, have been geared around the customer impact as well. And that's not been the case even a couple years ago. So I think there's a shift in the prioritization. It's not just about money, it's about serving your customers, and then the money will come along. And I think that's important. Comments on that from your experiences too?
Actually, I want to ask you to take a step back. So I think maybe we haven't talked about the actual X-ray process and what takes place. So it may be confusing to our audience. So Terry, take a step back and just say, how did you do this X-ray? What it provided? What did they do? The actual process of doing an X-ray, so it becomes clear
Awesome.
for our audience.
Okay, awesome. The X-Ray Diagnostic process, once we decide who's going to be in the meeting, the senior level folks who are decision makers and are responsible to help align their teams to drive the business forward, everyone who's going to be at the meeting gets 5 assessments, computerized, and the information is not confidential. It is all aggregated up into a report, so that when we get together for that, you know, day or 2-day, oftentimes a 2-day meeting, we use that information from the reports as conversation starters to see what's really going on. And, you know, we talked about hidden agents. It's where we uncover what's been swept under the carpet. Everyone knows really what's going on, and yet are they talking about it? And so those reports that get aggregated together for the non-negotiable rules, the 27 challenges, it comes up with the build, you know, ratios, all the fodder that goes into encouraging the conversation from each person's perspective. That's key. No one hides out. Everyone's voice counts. And we do on that first day a deep dive into what I say is not always comfortable. It's clearly not my favorite day, because we have to go in and excavate what are the challenges, what's really going on, so that then we can come up with what are the initiatives, which we do on the second day, which is much more positive. How are we going to solve these challenges, so that the process, the formula, isn't any one size fits all. It gives a methodology that the team can collectively use to come up with what, from their experience and their knowledge of their business, will help to move the entire organization together.
Thank you. Murray, any comments?
Well, I'm just reflecting on everything that Terry's been sharing with us, which is awesome. And I look at a stage 5 company, which is actually called integration. And I'm reflecting on the things you said, Terry, that they had a number of different retail locations. And I can see how stage 5 becomes so critical to integrate, because it could be so easy for them to not care about anybody else in the organization and just focus on their own locations. Yet if they integrate, and it sounds like they have been, then you get best practices.
Yes.
And which is awesome.
Yes. Yeah, so well said. And it's a lot, I guess I would say, a luxury to have that umbrella for best practices, policies, procedures, protocols. And yet what's interesting, when they're together as a whole, they're stage 5, and yet each of the managers is running a stage 1, stage 2, and one
Right.
is a stage 3. So what's so cool about this model is that they have the protocols of how to set up a stage 1 and stage 2 organization, which is under their tutelage, under leadership. And so it's multiple levels. So I did something different this time. We came up with the initiatives globally, and then they each took a look at these initiatives, how they would apply it at their location with their team. So it's multi-dimensional. When I find when I'm working with organizations that are at different stages, individually and collectively at different stage. Have you had that experience too?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Again, that's where the word integration just fits it so perfectly with what you're trying to do with them.
Yeah. You know, the other piece I'll add, which is so interesting, is that when, was part of this process, we take the CEO a day before, a couple days before, the CEO diagnostic, I guess you could say, leadership style assessment, emotional intelligence. And when I took her through the emotional intelligence, she identified that she really needs to start listening more, that she could see how she can come across as too commanding. And with democratic being the leadership style for stage 5, it was just beautiful that what she was saying, she knew she needed to do, fit spot on into the model at the stage that she's operating at. And is it going to be easy for her? No, because in the DISC profile, she's a high D, and she's used to driving it. And to your point, with integration, it's getting everybody, to play nice together so they're not siloed, and they want to do that. And she has a lot to say about how easy or difficult that's going to be based on her style and how she approaches listening, asking questions from a democratic perspective, letting other folks have a vote.
So when you met this time, you did the X-ray and you met with them. At the end, the result was that they identified their hopefully 5 or maybe 6 initiatives and so on, and then operationalized it in a way, assigning a responsibility and as such.
Yes.
Tell us about that conversation. How did you get there? How did they feel getting there per se? Did you have commonality? Was there enthusiasm, excitement among the team and not just a couple of the senior leaders? Tell us more about that.
Oh my gosh. I love this question because it's the enthusiasm, the positive can-do attitude, the feeling of empowerment that they were a part of getting to create this. That's one of the reasons that I am so thrilled with this model, is to see that enlivened. And routinely, when I do follow-ups with the CEO, the owners, they'll say, my team is still on fire. I'm like, yes, that's what we're going for, right? That engagement at a higher level. And so that's the outcome, that they really get it. They get on fire, right? So here's, to answer your question, what's interesting. The initiatives they came up with, and they had this observation a couple years ago, were more concrete, foundational, because they hadn't gotten things done in stages 1, 2, 3, and 4 that they had to go back and I call clean up or shore up, position agreements, defining the organizational chart. I mean, some of the basic things that are tactical, so that this time with those pieces of the puzzle already done, we could go more into the operational or the environment, the communication flow, how to further reinforce and implement their values throughout the entire organization now that they have those tools established. You know, so often when you get your values, you get them done, check it off the list, and yet, no, they are really to be a living, breathing document. I think we talked about this, and they want to use it on a daily basis. And that is a winning formula to solidify, especially at a stage 5, that we're all going to be, you know, on the same page going forward. And I just always go back in my mind to Tony Hsieh's comment that he stopped having fun at his organization, so he sold it because they didn't have this type of an environment anymore.
Great. Murray, what are your comments? What is your experience with stage 5 companies and as such?
Well, actually, I'll add on to that a little bit differently. Thanks for asking, because I recently worked with a stage 6 company. And, you know, as Terry has pointed out, when we do that, we go back and we would look at stages 4 and 5 as well as 6. Now, 6 is what we call strategic. And I keep coming back to that integration and what this company, in order to be strategic, if that leadership team was not cohesive, and again, back to that word integration, and that's what they found, is that they were struggling being more strategic because people were working in silos because of that leadership. And it was really, really hard for them to pull out of that. But I would say within about a year after that, they had addressed that problem pretty well. You know, maybe not completely, but pretty well. So you could see that they were operating more strategic, you know, sometime later. But it was hard work, really hard work.
Really?
I agree that this model is absolutely phenomenal for bringing the best out of the team and unifying the voices, right? In the past, in my experience, I had used what everybody else uses, strategic planning sessions. And at best, I would say at 90% of the time, those sessions fail to keep alive throughout the year.
Yeah.
Usually around the 4th quarter, end of the 3rd quarter, the leadership got together and they started a journey as strategic planning. Then you meet one day and kind of create a plan, but it failed to be unanimous in voice. Everybody was on silos, so working in silos, as Murray just mentioned. And I find the stages of growth is probably the best replacement that I have found for that strategic planning, because it includes everything. It's all inclusive as to what needs to happen in an organization at a given stage. So that's how, when I introduce it and talk to executive teams about strategic planning, I introduce, let's look at some diagnostics. Let's look at the X-ray and see what that X-ray says to you. Then go from there, and really for you to be able to identify the areas that should be your focus.
Right.
In turn, you'll create a culture of sustainable growth.
Mm-hmm.
Because everybody's committed.
Yeah. Well, and that's what I love about this model too, is when you get this team together, they're not just thinking off the top of their head, which many strategic planning sessions do. And there's some value to that, you know, not to bash it too hard. But what I love about this is you've got data. You're not just, it's not just off the top of your head.
Yeah. And, you know, I'll add that oftentimes, you know, I'll share the books that exist, that there's a book for each stage. Mm-hmm. And that Lori Taylor is writing, and they're all on Amazon, and we have white papers that summarize each of the stages. And I find it really helpful for the senior team to be aware of what goes into this material, the data, if you will, in advance. And how I evaluate some success is when they start quoting from the books. You know, they use the matrix of how complicated this is in dialogue with me or with dialogue with one another, in that accountability, to your point, that accountability to keep it alive, that it becomes a part of their culture. It's the language of growth that they embrace to keep it alive for a year, for 2 years, for 3 years, because it is a solid methodology. It's a growth formula that scales in process as they grow.
Mm-hmm. And language is so important, and we all learned this from Lori, that you change the language, you change the experience. And it's just like DISC. Change the language, you change the experience. And that's what we're really able to do with people when they look at this data.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, when you change the language, you're changing the thoughts, right? And emotions are all created from our thoughts. So what language we use in our place of work with all levels of employees is very important, or has a direct relationship with the emotions that we create within or the energy we create within the organization. And the more cohesive it is, better everyone would communicate, relate, and get the job done.
Yes. Yes. You know, it reminds me of one of the other points that we reinforce so often with the owner, the CEO, the senior team, the leader of groups, is that you're not allowed to come in a bad mood. You really set the tone for the day, and your team members deserve to have you show up as the best that you can possibly show up. And that's just like, you know, it's like, wow. It's like, yeah, really, you're not allowed to come in a bad mood. And that's so important to how to set the tone.
And we emphasize that these sessions is not about you, the CEO. It's about the team. And that's one of the reasons that we do share. We meet before, go through the assessments and the debrief in generalities with the CEO. So there is no hiccup. So we get in that room with the team, then the CEO realizes that they need to have composure and must allow the team to express whatever ideas and views they have, so we can create commonality at the end.
Yeah, that's well put.
Yeah, well put. It also speaks to what we call the modality. You know, is the CEO, the managers, and the staff. They each have a different presence that they bring, and there is a protocol that gives guidance on, you know, empower your staff at this stage, let them be dominant. At another stage, empower your managers to be dominant. So I'm going to go back to a quote from a client who said, this model makes leading and managing like paint by numbers. And it does. If an organization embraces it as their methodology, it's like paint by numbers. And it's a lot of work and a lot of creativity that makes it fun. Makes it really fun.
In my corporate experience, I learned that the more I emphasize on people, relationships, reactions, the intangible stuff that is should be included in leadership, the more numbers actually worked. Meaning the numbers were not accidents. They're byproduct of what I did with the team. I was not the individual contributor. I got the job done through others. And that is the case with every senior team, executive team. And they need to understand those behaviors that you instill in the organization, the relationships you instill in the organization is what produces the numbers you're looking for. So it's the byproduct of the behavior.
Yes. Yeah, it reminds me, when I lived up in Fort Collins, my neighbor is an owner of one of the microbreweries that became very large. And I interviewed her one time and she said, oh yeah, happy brewmasters make happy beer which serves for happy customers. And it all starts with happy brewmasters. Like it was so many years ago, and that's so accurate to your point about setting the tone with people.
When Southwest hit it really big, and it was under scrutiny from every direction to see why they're so successful, the CEO said, I take care of our employees. Employees are the ones that take care of the customer. So that's, in a leadership role, that is what's important. Take care of your employees.
Yeah.
That's exactly correct.
Excellent. So any other experiences you want to share with us? Any specifics?
I think we've given some really great examples. The only one that pops into my head is when I worked with a stage 3 organization that had 2 women boutiques, a pharmacy, and a coffee shop. And they wanted to unify those very different businesses together with common vision, mission, vision, values. And they're the ones that totally got on fire because they're so small by themselves, yet they have the larger grouping, 34 employees together. And oh my gosh, it was so much fun. I mean, the light bulbs were just going off of possibilities and how to get organized and processes and making sure the right people and really developing a coaching leadership style at that stage is so important. And the concept of coach up or coach out. I find with my clients that too often they allow people who are causing drag and they just don't get the coach up or coach out. And it's fair. That's being kind to people. So I guess that would be a comment that I would like to share as well.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Let me touch on a current experience that I have working with an organization that is at the cusp of going from a stage 1 to stage 2 company. Meaning they really need to add perhaps 1 or 2 more people, I believe 1 more person to be officially a stage 2, but in all reality they are. So what I see to be the biggest challenge is that the CEO, the founder and CEO, is so vested in the day-to-day doing that she's not able to be the visionary. And that is what I find to be the most challenging part of stage 1 company going to stage 2 and beyond, that the CEO or owner, founder learns that I need to be the visionary to get it there. If I am the doer and I'm doing so much, I'm so integrated in the day-to-day actions, it'll be almost impossible for me to be able to successfully go from the stage 1 and grow to stage 2, 3, and beyond. So that is a crucial factor for startups. Mm-hmm. So those of us that had just started a company, it's really important for that CEO to understand, yes, you have a talent, you have a know-how, you are the technician that got it going, but you have to learn to hand off and be the visionary, as without the being visionary, you can't grow your company. What's your experience in that situation?
Yeah, well, we all know, even each of us running a stage 1 company, it requires a dedication to a vision. And it doesn't mean it can't change over time, but that's what starts it all. And getting up every day to work countless hours to realize that vision.
Yeah. I've also found it's essential that they develop trust to be able to hand off, because sometimes when we're starting out at stage 1, we just throw bodies at it to get the job done. And as the organization transitions stage 2, it might get a different skill set and someone that they can trust at a higher level to be comfortable handing off some of the duties and responsibilities that they alone think that I've got to be the one to do it, well, that's going to limit the growth for sure.
Yes, this company that I'm speaking of, that is exactly the case. They don't have the right people in place. The people that you hire right off the bat may not be at the level that you need them to continue on to other stages without being developed. I don't advocate to getting rid of your employees. They're committed to you. You should be committed to them. However, they have to be developed.
Yeah, that's right.
So part of that is doing assessments. Are people with the right competencies in the right positions, and also the degree of that those competencies have to be developed for the next stage. So most stage 1 or 2 companies do not have a development program. And I keep on emphasizing that your growth is dependent on it, and you want to keep your employees rather than hiring new ones because it costs you more, right? Excellent. Okay, so I think this is a wonderful session giving practical experiences to our audience. Thank you very much. And if you'd like to know more, please go on our website, thrive&advance.com, and study more on 7 stages of growth. If you like to know where you are or get more input and more reporting on the stage that you're in, we're happy to provide. Send us a note, and we'll be happy to send you the relevant reports. With that said, thank you so much, Murray and Terry. Thank you for giving us your time once again, and I wish everyone a very good day.